Welcome to week 4. To recap where we've been. Week 1, we looked at emotional constructs that were relevant to gifted learners, specifically Dabrowski's theory of personality development, and then the related concepts of overexcitabilities and intensities. We then looked into the way those constructs can create different psychological responses that manifest in gifted students, such as asynchrony, multipotentiality, perfectionism, underachievement. And then we looked at how those manifestations can impact relationships. This leads us next into how we can set up a responsive classroom using all of this knowledge of the affective needs of gifted students. One way we can do this is by understanding motivation. And Renzulli developed a model to help that defines giftedness, and it used 3 rings. Each ring represents a different trait of giftedness according to him. One of them is above average ability, another is high level of creativity, and then the third is task commitment. And it's only when all 3 of these traits are working that gifted behaviors will occur. And I used to use this visual when I either hosted orientations or when it was the first time talking with someone about giftedness. And it's often, I saw that light bulb moment whenever, especially in parents, whenever they realize that, gifted behaviors require all 3 of these things interacting at the same time. This model shows us why expecting a gifted behavior from a gifted kid all the time it's unrealistic. And if you expect it, then you can expect to be disappointed. The majority of the time, gifted behavior isn't happening because there isn't motivation. There's not that commitment to complete the task. There are also different patterns of attitudes, behaviors, and parenting and teaching styles, which can result in different types of motivation. One style is an authoritarian style. Students may be conditioned to respond to stern, demanding, do this or else requirements where expectations are strictly enforced. Or the students may have caregivers or teachers who have been very permissive, indulgent, maybe even uninvolved. And, that may or may not have been sensitive and responsive. But the expectations in those cases are rarely, if ever, enforced. Some students may have trouble shifting between these different styles. As advocates for your gifted students, it's important to be aware of those different patterns that students may be subjected to. And to know when it's the right time to step in, either talk to the student about it or be able to talk to the adults about what's best for that kid. Strong family ties can lead to strong desires to achieve and please in order to enact the values of the family. There is high achievement motivation in families that are cohesive and child-centered. In families with competition among the members, there's a tendency for motivation in terms of power and dominance. And this can happen with the parents as well as other siblings or kids, cousins or whatever. Motivation comes from competition of who's going to come out on top in terms of that power structure. This is going to create stress. That could work for good. Stress is used to achieve high levels of success, but it can become negative when that is used in order to get unmet psychological needs met. An example that comes to mind is from a TV show, Big Bang Theory. Leonard has a relationship that, the relationship with his mom can show us an example of how competition among family members, it can result in a successful individual in terms of the career, the profession, but also one who is unhappy in terms of those family relationships. We also need to consider the support and the balance between things like home and school. Parents support schools, and the schools need to support the parents. We need to provide resources to help the child learn, to do what's needed for them, but also, for the parent to learn about the child, the needs of the child. Also consider the atmosphere in each place. Notice in the articles by Sylvia Rim in terms of relationships with parents. If the parents are bad-mouthing the school, this is going to be reflected in the student's motivation at school. I can't help but wonder if this could have had anything to do with Jack Androcka's relationship with his biology teacher. Also consider the balance between teaching and learning. There's a balance of dependence and independence for the learners. A teacher provides opportunities and instruction. That's what we do. As teachers, there are times when that learning is largely dependent on what we do. You know, it occurs because of the things we orchestrate, the resources we gather, the questions we ask. Motivation for this is typically in terms of grades, praise, stickers, some recognition that the task is complete. The responsibility, though, for learning falls on the student. And there are times when we want the students to be independent. That's when the motivation is coming from just that desire to learn. It's inside them. There's also balance between choice and challenge. That's very necessary. And we've hit on this before with the school-wide enrichment model, Renzulli again. Sometimes a choice can simply be between two things. And sometimes it's best for it to just be between two things. For some kids, more than two is just too much. The possibilities, the permutations, that need to choose the right thing, got to be correct. They're overwhelming to some kids. You're giving a choice of 6 books, for example, and ask them to choose one for a book club. That's a true story. A perfectionist who ended up assigning values to the features of the books in order to help him make that decision, because it had to be right, even though it was a book. Also, there needs to be a balance of challenge. It needs to be just a little out of reach, not too easy, but not too hard. That's a tough balance to reach. It's that idea of Goldilocks. It's got to be just right. It's important to listen and observe, have some good, assessments in place, as well as a strong relationship with the student. So if an assignment is just right, and so that they feel comfortable coming to you to tell you that maybe the assignment isn't just right. And then when it isn't, that we can help modify it so that it can be. Motivation is that X factor in learning. The best, most beautiful, enticing, Pinterest-worthy classrooms are of no use unless there is motivation to learn. And what does that environment look like? First, the classroom needs to be a place where all the kids are appropriately challenged. That in itself is the most powerful motivator, along with choice. And these are ideas, again, that we've seen all throughout. We visited this idea before too. The kids are going to choose how they will complete something when the challenge is absent. It's going to be neatly, quickly. How small can I write before that teacher's going to need to find a magnifying glass to read what I'm writing? The teacher also can create it through a class culture, an environment that is conducive to learning. Kagan structures are popular, are often used to help create a positive classroom environment, but not always conducive to how gifted students learn, especially in a typical heterogeneously grouped classroom. I know firsthand how powerful that those systems can be in a regular classroom. I'm a believer, but I also know that strictly following that formula in a room where gifted students have been placed can be stressful for everyone involved for a lot of reasons. Gifted students are outliers, and we need to consider that when we're looking at ideas, on grouping strategies, because the outliers aren't always included in all that research, and we may need to, adapt it somehow to accommodate for those gifted learners. The learning environment for gifted learners also needs to include a teacher who can counsel when stress or social difficulty makes it hard for students to cope, or when the students are becoming unhappy or demotivated. Keep in mind, though, that just because a student is not happy in the moment, it's not always a negative thing. That could be a situation of positive disintegration that's going on there. Motivating gifted learners, it's all about finding the right balance. A common way to consider motivation is extrinsic or external, and then intrinsic within the individual. And I know you've seen these before, so we're just going to skip over that. But you know what? The research isn't really definitive on this. A couple of researchers, Lenz and Rand, they looked at intrinsic and extrinsic motivation as the source for motivation, and they concluded, wait for it, yeah, both are operative. That's in one of the articles that you'll be looking at today. Um, some examples of extrinsic motivators: awards, competition. The competition, though, is not only in terms of power and winning something, it's also a symbiotic relationship where students are learning together and helping each other. They're pushing each other to do better. An anecdote in one of the assigned readings for today is about Chris. I think he was learning to play guitar with a friend and noticed an undercurrent of friendly competition, which pushed them both to achieve more. It's also seen with Olympic swimmers. With when something is difficult, the others who are going through the same thing can help you endure the pain and the hard work necessary to achieve the goal you set. I've heard that from people who've been through like a PhD program, that it really helps to have those people around you. I found the same thing when I was going through my national board certification. I needed those people to be able to help me get to that final goal. Recognition is another area of extrinsic motivation. Praise from parents, teachers, other kids, and support is extrinsic. Just having parents, teachers, mentors who will come alongside to encourage the student. That can be used as a form of extrinsic motivation. The teacher-directed learning that we talked about earlier, it usually has less choice, and it's more of a performance goal orientation. And then the contests. Contests can be good, I've found. It puts kids in that bigger arena. Many kids respond to the possibility of winning an award, being recognized on a bigger stage than Northeast Missouri. Others, though, are motivated more intrinsically. They wanted to learn what was required to know that they wanted just to know that they had the ability, the courage, sometimes to put themselves out there. It's different types of contests appeal to different learners within the contests. There are multiple entries in terms of motivation. That reminds me of something. Several years ago, I found a book. This is it. And you can tell it's been used quite a bit. I've even, this year, had some students who were looking through and found things that they wanted to do. Poetry contest we didn't get to do, but that's a good book. And I am compiling a list that I'll give you at the end of the course with all the titles of these books that I just keep randomly remembering at certain points. But contests can be a really good way to motivate kids. But we also want to balance it. Yeah, we want to balance with some intrinsic types of things too. We want to build that up as well. Research tells us that gifted students are more likely to be intrinsically motivated. But it's not every individual and it's not every time. The hallmarks of intrinsic motivation are students having more buy-in. There's a higher probability of them achieving that state of flow in their work and their learning. Giving the opportunity and the time for the student to go further, go more in depth. In large part, this is due to the level of challenge, the level of choice, and the interactions with other people, sometimes that students get from the work. Intrinsic motivation is more likely when students are working or learning for their own sake, their own personal satisfaction. In the classroom, intrinsic motivation is when a student designs, even their own learning course of study. They don't need the teacher stepping in for support or praise. It's all inside. It's all self-directed. They're aware of what their next step needs to be. They know the end goal. They don't need an A to know that they nailed it or that they arrived. They don't need comparisons with others or someone's opinion to know when that goal is mastered. Some ideas that I wanted to share with you that have worked for me. The stock market game. It was free every year that I signed up. I think every year it's like, hey, this year we're going to be free. And most likely it still is. But it demonstrates the balance that's needed. Students have buy-in, and there's a sense of flow that goes along with it. They see a purpose to what they are doing and learning. There is the possibility of winning, and there's motivation to learn skills that can be useful for their futures. I think it appeals to the intellectual OE. How do all these pieces work together to help create wealth? And they also get to work in teams. You can have that team of 2 for some of your learners, and then larger teams based on whatever their needs are. They research stocks, they produce a portfolio. The competition factor can also be intrinsic for kids, wanting to see where they start, where they end. Can they improve? That external competition doesn't matter as much as how they do in the long run. I've also seen students who team up based on belief systems. Like maybe we want to protect the environment, and our portfolio is only going to be made up of companies that share this belief. So they spend a lot of time going in depth researching those companies. What happens when we try that? This particular competition also has an individual and peer accountability built into it as well. There are prizes for the team and also some competitions for individuals. There's also the possibility to get, we had a person that she was in Omaha, a stockbroker who spoke with my kids a couple of times, and that was a really neat experience for them. The idea of mentors again. Explore Vision is another competition. Oh my gosh, so many elements of this that make it ideal for gifted learners. It appeals to so many of the intensities that we've discussed. Students start out by researching a technology of interest. They learn about the science concepts that are involved in it and how that technology evolved over time. The imaginational OE comes in with deciding how the technology might evolve 20 years from now. The teams can be made up of 2, which meets the need for those introverts, or 4 people. De Bono's theory was a big help with us as students learn to communicate, compromise, and work together to finish the project. Students often get into a real state of flow with this. I found this a little more difficult to do in middle school because of those 52-minute time blocks. The kids adapted better to it than I did, though, and they made it work. Before the regional winners were announced, we would always share the final products with school and with parents, and then the students got so much extrinsic praise for it, as well as that intrinsic satisfaction for a job well done. TED Talks, having students create their own TED Talks is pretty common anymore. But in case you aren't aware, though, TED Ed offers curriculum materials that are really pretty awesome to help get your kids to that point. Also, they give the option of uploading talks to a blog, and you guessed it, a competition where the students can be chosen to present their talk on a TED stage. A former student of mine who worked on these at the elementary level and then continued at the middle school with a different teacher, she was chosen to go to New York one year and present her talk with other kids. So it's a pretty special honor. Destination imagination or future problem solving. When students are involved in competitions of this nature, research shows it can have an impact on underachieving kids. Both of these competitions are made up of student teams, so they are good places to foster social learning and friendships for gifted individuals. The competitions also appeal to and use intensities of gifted students in a fun way. Both of these competitions can be expensive, especially when travel is involved to compete in different cities. Your community may be able to help, though. In my community, Optimist Club and the Rotary Club were really supportive for us doing that. The community organizations also, they may have their own types of competitions for kids. So I just encourage you to look into those things. Other quick ways to motivate in the classroom are through like the use of choice and challenge, interactions with others, like in a makerspace or through those instant challenges that we talked about a few lessons ago. Independent inquiries too. Independent projects give kids interactions, challenging instruction, and choice, all of which are really powerful motivators. The learners make the plan. These are some questions that can help facilitate the planning. Like, what do you want to learn? Why do you want to learn this? Who or what will you need in order to help you? How will you know that you're finished? And will you share the finished product somehow? And when will you be able to finish? So that they're making a timeline, maybe chunking things. And then if it's for the teacher, because sometimes we have to think of those, how is this learning related to district standards? Because everything can be related somehow. And just a note too about the competitions. My curriculum wasn't built entirely around competition. There was usually one opportunity per semester. There was usually choice in whether or not students wanted to participate. They usually did, and I understand the concern with having kids compete. The reality, though, is that competition speaks to a lot of students, and a high percentage of them need that competition in order to commit and motivate. Sometimes it was even like a face-saving, just to try, that it helped them get themselves out there by providing that external motivation of the contest. It just made kids curious to see how they might measure up in that larger pool, to know if they could get through to the end of a longer project related to the competition, because some of those are longer, like Explore Vision especially. And at the end of any competition, we would celebrate individually as a whole class, family. That's our family. And invite families. Just, that we made it from start to finish. We focused on the way it felt at the end of the process, how it felt to be finished. And that helped foster that movement from that extrinsic toward intrinsic motivation, to try those big things. The reward is in reaching, in the doing, the icing to win. It's just that's the icing on the cake. So I hope that's helpful.